Welcome back to Ghoul School, everybody. We're reading The Black Cauldron. We are on chapter 13 today. When we left off, Taran and his friends had, of course, met Ordu, Orwen, and Orgosh, and they talked all about Dalbin. And we realize now that these enchantresses have the cauldron, and they're just not willing to give it up. We also realize, of course, that Dalbin was found by these witches when he was a baby and was raised by them, and that he chose the Book of Three when he left them. He had to leave them because he sucked on a little bit of potion where he gained too much knowledge about the world and about life in general. So he took the Book of Three. So now we know where he got the Book of Three from in the first place, from these three enchantresses. So we can gather from that he has now become this great enchanter because of the witches themselves. But the witches then tell Taran and his friends, you can stay here for the night, but you can't have the cauldron. And they're calling the cauldron the Black Kraken too. So just a little interesting about them. Chapter 13 is called The Plan. The door slammed shut behind them, and once again the companions found themselves outside the cottage. Well, I like that, Eloise cried indignantly. After all their talk of dear little Dalbin and sweet little Dalbin, they've turned us out. Well, better turned out than turned into, if you know what I mean, said the bard. A flam's always kind to animals, but somehow I can't bring myself to feel like I should actually become one. No, oh no, Gurgi cried. Gurgi too wants to stay as he is, bold and clever. Taran turned back to the cottage and began pounding on the door. They must listen to us, he declared. They didn't even take time to think it over. But the door did not open, and though he ran to the window and rapped long and hard, the enchantresses did not show themselves again. Well, I'm afraid that's your answer, said Fluter. They've said all they intend to say, and perhaps it's for the best. I have the uneasy feeling that all that knocking and thumping might, well, you don't know what those ladies, they might get upset about the noises. Well, we can't just go away, Taran replied. The cauldron is in their hands, and friends are not a Dalbin. There's no telling what they'll do with it. I fear them, and I distrust them. You heard the way that one Orgosh was talking. Yes, I can imagine what she would have done to Dalbin. He shook his head gravely. This is what Gwydion warned us against. Whoever has the cauldron can be a mortal threat to Prydain if they choose to be. Well, at least Ellidyr hasn't found it, Eloise said. That's something to be grateful for. You know, if you want the advice of one who, after all, is the oldest of all of us here, said the bard, I think we should do well and hurry on home and let Dalbin and Gwydion attend to this matter. I mean, after all, Dalbin should know how to deal with these three. No, Taran answered, that won't do. We'd lose precious days in travel. The huntsman failed to get the cauldron back once, but who knows what Arwen will attempt next? No, we dare not leave the thing here. Well, for once, declared Eloise, I agree. We've come this far, and we shall have to see it to the end. I don't trust those enchantresses either. They wouldn't sleep if they thought we had the cauldron. I shall certainly have nightmares if I think about them with it. Not to mention Arwen. I believe no one, human or otherwise, should have that much power. She shuddered. Oh, there goes the ants on my back again. She gets that chilled feeling to herself whenever she thinks about these things. Yes, well, it's true, Fluter began, but the fact remains. They have that wretched pot, and we don't. And they're there, and we're here, and it looks very much as though we're going to stay that way. Taran was thoughtful for a moment. You know, when Arwen wouldn't give the cauldron back to them, he said, they went and took it. Now, since they won't have us let the cauldron, I see only one way. We shall have to take it. Steal it? Cried the bard. His worried expression changed rapidly and his eyes brightened. I mean, he dropped his voice to a whisper, steal it? Now there's a thought, he went on eagerly. Never occurred to me. Yes, that's the way, he added with excitement. Now that has some style, some flair to it. Yeah, there's one difficulty, though, Eloise said. We don't know where they've hidden the cauldron, and they're evidently not going to let us find it. Taryn frowned. I wish Dolly were here. We'd have no trouble at all. I don't know, there must be some other way. They told us we could stay the night, he continued. That gives us from now until dawn. Come on, let's not stand in front of their cottage. They'll know we're up to something. Or do spoke about a shed. The companions led their horses to the side of a hill, where a low, dilapidated building tottered shakily on the turf. It was bare and bleak, and the autumn wind whistled through the chinks in the earthen wall. The bard stamped his feet and beat his arms. Whew! This is a chilly spot to plant anything, he remarked. Those enchantresses may have a lovely view of the marshes, but it's sure a cold one. I wish we had some straw, Eloise said, or something to keep us warm. We're going to freeze to death before we have a chance to think of any ideas at all. Gergie will find some straw, Gergie suggested. He scurried out of the shed and ran toward the chicken roost. Taryn paced back and forth. We'll have to get into that cottage as soon as they're asleep. He shook his head and fingered the brooch at his throat. But how? Adon's clasp has given me no ideas. The dreams I had of the cauldron are without meaning to me. If only I could understand them. Hey, suppose you dozed off right now, said Fluter helpfully. Slept as fast as you could. I mean as hard as you could. You could find the answer. I'm not so sure, replied Taryn. It doesn't quite work that way. It would be a lot easier than boring a hole through the hill, which was my next suggestion, said the bard. We could block up their chimney and smoke them out, Eloise said. Then one of us could sneak into the cottage. Oh, no, she added. On second thought, I'm afraid anything we might put down their chimney, well, they could very well put something worse back up it. Now that I think about it, they don't even have a chimney, so forget that idea. Gertie, in the meantime, had returned with a huge armload of straw from the chicken roost, and the companions gratefully began heaping it onto the clay floor. While Gertie went off again to fetch another load of straw, Taryn looked dubiously at the straggly pile. Well, I suppose I could dream, he said without much hope. I certainly don't have any other better suggestions. We could bed you down really nicely, said Fluter, and while you're dreaming, the rest of us would be thinking too. That way we'd all be working, in our own fashion. I don't mind telling you, he added. I wish I had Adon's brooch. Sleep? I wouldn't need to be asked twice. I am weary down to my bones. Taryn, still unsure, made ready to settle himself in the straw, when Gergie reappeared, and he was wide-eyed and trembling. The creature was so upset he could only gasp and gesture. Taryn sprang to his feet. What is it? He cried. Gergie beckoned them toward the chicken roost, and the companions hurried after. The agitated Gergie led them into the Waddle and Daub building, and he slunk back then terrified. He pointed to the far corner. There, in the middle of the straw, stood a cauldron. It was squat and black, and half as tall as a man. Its ugly mouth gaped wide enough to hold a human body. The rim of the cauldron was crooked and battered. Its sides were dented and scarred, and on its lips and on the curve of its belly lay dark brown flecks and stains, which Taryn knew were not rust. A long, thick handle was braced by a heavy bar. 2 heavy rings, like the chinks of a great chain, were set on either side. Though made of iron, the cauldron seemed alive, grim and brooding with an ancient evil. The empty mouth caught the chill breeze, and a hushed muttering sound rose from the cauldron's depths, like the lost voices of the tormented dead. It's the Black Kraken, Taryn whispered in fear and awe. He well understood Gergie's terror, for the very sight of the cauldron was enough to make him feel like an icy hand was clutching at his heart. He turned away, hardly daring to look at the cauldron any longer. Fluter's face had turned pale. Elenwy had put a hand to her mouth. In the corner, Gurgi shivered pitifully. Though he himself had found it, he gave no joyous yelps of triumph. Instead, he sank deeper into the straw, and he tried to make himself as small as possible. Yes, well, I suppose it is indeed, replied Fluter, swallowing hard. On the other hand, he added hopefully, perhaps it's not. They did say they had a number of other cauldrons and kettles lying about. We wouldn't want to take it by mistake. It's the Kraken, Taryn said. I've dreamed of it. Even if I hadn't, I would know it is. I can sense the evil in it. I can too, murmured Elenwy. It's full of death and suffering. I understand now why Gwydion wants to destroy it. She turned to Taryn. You were right in seeking it without delay, Elenwy added with a shudder. I take back all the things I said. The Kraken must be destroyed as soon as possible. So Taryn can feel it because of his brooch, possibly, and Elenwy just has this intuition. She says, yeah, I just know this is the Black Cauldron. Yes, Fluter sighed. I'm afraid this is the Kraken itself. Oh, why couldn't it have been a nice little kettle instead of this big, ugly, hulking brute? However, he went on, taking a deep breath, let's snatch it. A flam never hesitates. So this cauldron's pretty large. It's about up to their waists. And, it'd be pretty large around. Obviously, a person can fit inside of it. And it's made of iron, so it'd be very, very heavy. No, Taryn cried, putting out his hand to restrain the bard. We dare not take it in broad daylight. And we mustn't stay here longer, or they'll know we've found it. We'll come back after nightfall with the horses, and we'll drag it away. For now, we better keep to the shed and act like nothing's happened. The companions quickly returned to the shed. Once away from the Kraken, Gurgi regained some of his spirits. Crafty Gurgi found it, he cried. Oh, yes, Gurgi always finds what's lost. He's found piggies, and now he finds a great cauldron of wicked doings and brewings. Kind master will honor humble Gurgi. Nevertheless, his face remained wrinkled with fear. Taryn gave Gurgi a comforting pat on the shoulder. Yes, old friend, he said, you've helped us more than once. But I never would have imagined they just would have hidden the Kraken in an empty chicken roost under a pile of dirty straw. He shook his head. I think they'd want to guard it better. Well, not at all, said the bard. They were very clever. They put it in one of the first places anybody would look, knowing quite well it's so easy that nobody would ever think to look there. Perhaps, Taryn said, and then he frowned. Or perhaps, he added, unable to stifle the dread filling him, perhaps they meant for us to find it. Fluter and Elenwy picked up the rings, and Gurgi lifted the other side. We'll haul it out and rope it to the horses. Are you ready now? Oh, sorry, I skipped a page there. Let me go back. In the shed, the companions tried to sleep, knowing the night to come would be a hard and difficult one. Fluter and Gurgi dozed briefly. Elenwy huddled in her cloak with some straw piled all around her. Taryn was too restless and uneasy to even close his eyes. He sat silently, in his hands the long coil of rope he'd taken from what little gear remained to the companions. They decided they would sling the cauldron between the two horses and make their way from the marshes into the safety of the forest, and there they would destroy the Kraken. No sign of life came from the cottage that night. At nightfall, however, a candle suddenly glowed in the window. Taryn rose quietly, and he moved stealthily out of the shed. Clinging to the shadows, he made his way to the low building, and he peered in. For a moment, he stood there, amazed, unable to move. Then he turned and he raced back to the others as quickly as he could. I saw them in there, he whispered, rousing the bard and Gurgi. But they aren't the same ones after all. What? Cried Elenwy. Are you sure you didn't just stumble on a different cottage? Well, of course I didn't, retorted Taryn. And if you don't believe me, go look for yourself. They aren't the same. There's still 3 of them, yes, but But they're different. One of them was carding wool, and one of them was spinning, and the third one was weaving. Well, I suppose, said the bard, it passes the time for them. I mean, there's not much to do in the middle of these dismal bogs. I'm going to have to go see this for myself, Eloise declared. I mean, there's nothing so strange about weaving, but beyond that, I can't make any sense out of what you're saying. With Taryn leading the way, the companions stole cautiously to the window. It was just as Taryn had said. Inside the cottage, 3 figures went about their tasks, but not one of them resembled Ordu, or Wen, or Orgosh. They're beautiful, whispered Elenwe. I've heard of hags disguising themselves as beautiful maidens, murmured the bard, but I've never heard of beautiful maidens wanting to disguise themselves as ugly hags. It's just not natural, and I don't mind telling you, it makes me edgy. I think we better seize the cauldron and be gone from here. I don't know who they are, said Taryn, but I fear they are more powerful than we can ever guess. Somehow we've fallen on something, and I don't know what. It troubles me. Yes, we must take the cauldron as soon as we can, but we'll have to wait till they're asleep. If they sleep, said the bard. Now that I've seen this, nothing would surprise me. Not even if they hung by their toes all night like bats. For a long time, Taryn feared that the bard was right, and that the enchantresses may not sleep at all. The companions took turns watching the cottage, and it was not until almost dawn that the candle finally winked out. In an agony of waiting, Taryn still delayed. Soon a loud snoring noise rose from within. They must have gone back to themselves again, remarked the bard. I can't imagine beautiful ladies snoring like that. No, that's got to be Orgosh. I'd recognize that snort anywhere. In the still shadows of the false dawn, the companions hastened to the chicken roost, where Elenwe ventured to light her bauble. The kraken squatted in the corner, and it was black and baleful. Hurry now, Taryn ordered, taking hold of the handle. Fluter, Elenwe, pick up those rings, and Gurgi, lift the other side. We'll haul it to the ropes and rope it to the horses. Are you ready? All lift together. The companions gave a mighty heave and then nearly fell to the ground. The cauldron hadn't moved. Oh, it's heavier than I thought, said Taryn. Try again. He made an attempt to shift his grip on the handle, but his hand wouldn't come free. In a spurt of fear, he tried to pull his hand away. It was in vain. I say, muttered the bard, I seem to be caught on something. So am I, Elenwe cried, struggling to tear her hands away. And Gurgi's caught too, howled the terrified Gurgi. Oh, sorrow, I can't pull my hand away. Desperately, the companions flung themselves back and forth, fighting against the mute iron enemy. Taryn wrenched and tugged until he sobbed for a lack of strength. Elenwe had dropped in exhaustion, her hand still on the heavy ring. Once again, Taryn strained to break free. The black kraken held him fast. A figure in a long night robe appeared in the doorway. Ah, it's Ordu, cried the bard. We'll be turned to toads for sure. And that's the end of chapter 13.